It's everyone saw the monarch butterfly. You know, the rusty past bumblebee. That's a wood thrush you can hear in the background. And wood thrushes right there. Only 17 to 25%. So that's a map of South and Southeastern Ontario, and you can see how little forest is left. Only 17 to 25% of our forest is left, lost forest. And so that's why we're losing so many species here. And over 690 of those species are very south, that red part, that's us. We're part of that red zone there. Lost relationships. So those children at the very beginning, so many of our children have lost that relationship with the natural world. And I think that's one of the, from my perspective, I think that's one of the reasons that for our lack of, connection and climate. I think if we restore our connection with the natural world, that will take us a long way towards restoring our Earth. There's this contrast. It's called egotistical worldview. And we did the land acknowledgement when we started. And the Pope was just here, and there's this concept called doctrine of discovery, which was unsettled lands. We can go in and just do what we like, and we cut down the forest. But part of this was that humans are on top, and not just humans, but men are on top, and then women, and then certain races, and then all the way down to the insects and all the creatures at the bottom. So that's called the egotistical worldview. Robin Wall Kimmer, if you've ever read her, she's wonderful. She says there is another way of putting your hands in the earth and getting to work and saying, yeah, we've made a lot of mistakes, but we can be healers too. And that's Astrid from Little Forest, and she's teaching somebody how to plant trees for the little forest we planted last year. And this is Maureen, one of the co-founders, and she says trees are medicine for children, children are medicine for trees. So those children at the beginning, as they plant, their relationship is healing with the forest, and they're offering medicine not just to the trees, but the soil as well. And that's Maureen's planting the last tree last year of 1,800 trees that we planted in the Tree Little Forest. So this new way of thinking is called an egotistical worldview, where nobody's on top. We're all interrelated. There's relationships between all the species. Humans are no, better than anybody else. So Little Forest Kingston, we envision Kingston as a nature positive city in a forest, restoring life and relationships, which is the biodiversity. On the left, you see a non-native tree, on the right, a native tree. And that's the number, like the diversity of species that you will get from native trees is incredible compared to non-native. Then you add layers to that, and that multiplies out. So the concept is 330, 300, what I said at the beginning. And we all know about how healing trees are. And Canada also has a biodiversity strategy. We haven't really heard much about it, and they haven't published that much. The UN has talked about full recovery of nature by 2050 and reversing loss by 2030. So up until 2030, they're still expecting we're losing life, we're losing biodiversity. So Canada has a strategy to stop that by 2030 as well, although they haven't done too much around it yet. And these are just some images from Wild Seed Project in the United States, where they reimagined some sections of Portland, and just imagine the same thing in Kingston. This is a bank, someone's backyard, a food forest in a front yard. Just a strip mall. As we reduce our driving and do other mobility options, or we have unused parking lots, how could they be repurposed? And the city is they haven't decided about 330, 300. They're considering adopting that, but they're worried, especially in central Kingston, that there's not enough space. But I think if we repurpose the parking lots, we can find some space. This is in Vancouver, where they have what they call a rain city strategy, where they're treating rainwater as a precious resource. And there was a stream here, so they're daylighting the stream in this road. And just imagine the kids out playing on the street, which is for all, not just for cars. This is a little forest. Miyawaki forest is another way. The method we're using is called Miyawaki method, a Japanese forester. And it's now being found around the world. And this is Utrecht University. And you can see where they did a little forest there. This is in France, where they took that little parking space, very odd triangular parking space in the middle of 3 roads. And last year they planted a forest there, right in the middle of the city. This is my front yard. You can see there wasn't much there to start with, the typical foundation plantings and a birch that died in the ice storm, and now on the right. This is in Pakistan. India and Pakistan, or Pakistan has adopted it as a national policy to try and reforest Pakistan and to reduce heat. So India and Pakistan, there's a lot of work going on around like this. This is Montreal, where they're taking a place that's 70% asphalt and turning it into a biodiversity corridor. In this case, it's not a little forest, but they're creating different ecological habitats. So they're thinking about ecological habitats, because different species like to live in different types of environments. In this case, a meadow with a little patches of forest, and it's because the primary part is under wires, so you can't do a forest under wires. This is Brampton. They have an eco park strategy, and they've mapped out their natural spaces. And you can see on the bottom left, what they're doing is looking at them, saying, how can we increase them, enlarge them, and then connect them with corridors so that we can all walk between them, so that there's one walking space for everybody. We've all heard about heat. And Kingston is one of the cities expected to experience in Canada extreme heat. We've been in the warning sign, and in BC, you can see this was from the heat wave, where 600 and some people died, and the highest proportion of deaths were in areas with low socioeconomic status, which is because there's the least trees in those areas. So it's called tree inequity. And Kingston is now very aware of this, and we're working on a project to increase tree equity. So this is the extreme heat that's forecast. Green infrastructure is one of the big ways that we can prepare for and live through extreme heat, mitigate it. We can't reverse it at this point. We can hopefully halt further, but the green infrastructure, which is working with nature. So this is the forecast for Kingston, 8 times the number of heat waves and extreme heat days, lasting up to 17 days. That's a long time. So tree canopy is not just the tree canopy that's right there, but tree canopy 60 meters away can be cooling. And the size of that, I think the next one shows, the size of it, the larger that green space is, the further it will cool. And the more diversity of species in that green space, the more it will cool. So the more layers, the more types of trees, the more it will cool. In China, you can see what they're doing along boulevards is they're planting trees, but they're not just planting like Kingston currently does, trees with grass in between them. They're already looking at ground cover species, shrubs, layers to increase the cooling, because China is experiencing extreme heat as well. And cities like Edmonton is one that I think is doing some really interesting work. And you can see on the left there, they've mapped out the different layers. And in Kingston right now, we've got our gravescape layer mapped out. We don't have our ecological layer mapped out. And we have a natural heritage study, but that's never been put into strategy. So something that me and LTV were in a meeting about last night was, how do we get this to be in Kingston's strategy?
Reed's framework really helped me to understand sustainability in a different way, showing that as we move from business as usual, the unsustainable practice, to green, which is just tweaking our behavior a little bit, being a little bit less bad, but still having a negative impact, to sustainable, 100% less bad, but doesn't actually give back and restore the damage we've already done on this planet. We're moving beyond sustainable design to restorative design, which means reforesting, creating new ecosystems, but it's still within the mindset of man over nature. So the next step beyond that even is reconciliatory design, which we reconcile the relationship between humanity and nature, include culture in nature, and create a world where our designs express that. And even beyond that, we move towards regenerative design, which is creating cultures that are able to work creatively with disruptions rather than to avoid them, to be resilient to change, because change is the only constant that we have on this planet, and be able to hand over to the next generation a richer, more regenerative, more resilient system than we received from the previous. So
this is really the egotistical worldview, that we are nature. And that is the real regenerative approach, that we are working with nature as nature. And it's a very decolonial approach. So if we're looking at reconciliation, planting, greening our cities, planting little forests, it's really a direct land acknowledgement that these were the trees that were here that we cut down. And now we are planting indigenous little forests again, because this landscape was once forest. Richard Wagamese, he said now he was a wonderful author, indigenous author. I've been considering the phrase all my relations for some time now. It's hugely important. It's our saving grace in the end. It points to the truth that we are all related. We are all connected. We all belong to each other. The most important word is all, not just those who look like me, sing like me, dance like me, speak like me, pray like me, or behave like me. And I'll let you finish reading that while I say, why is there a spring peeper there? Because Maureen, when she first visited the land on Highway 15, the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Project, and Maureen is Haudenosaunee, she said, she's Anishinaabe. She said the first language she heard was not English. The first language she heard was not Anishinaabe-Moan. The first language she heard was the spring peepers. And what that made her realize is that as we restore language, as she's working on her language, we have to think about all the languages of the land. And to me, that's a beautiful story. It's always going to stay with me. So we can have forest at the individual scale, so on our properties. That's my house there. At the neighborhood scale, and in this case, this isn't a forest, but this is a whole meadowway that's going in a street in the United States. We need all types of ecological systems for all the creatures. At the campus scale, imagine Queens is pretty gray right now, and the poor students walking in the campus, if the campus did this. Or ideally at the city scale, Barcelona, Singapore, Paris, big gray cities, but they are doing massive work to do this. They are mapping out greenways. They're planting trees. They're actually going to plant a forest at, what's the train station in Paris? If I said it, you would all recognize the name, like a major train station in Paris. They're putting a forest. Not that one, but yeah. So greening, Kingston has a 15-minute city strategy, which means like any of us should be able to walk to everything we need. Right now, they don't have green in that strategy. We need green in that strategy. And we're using the Miyawaki method. I won't say too much about that. If you're interested, I've got a bunch of information about that. But really, Akira Miyawaki, he said over 30 years ago, Japan, who cut down their forests, planted monoculture forests, he said, we can't wait 150 years for natural forest succession. Climate. And that was 30 years ago, he said that. So the Miyawaki method is the method of skipping the natural succession, planting all of the diverse later successional species together so that you have a biodiverse forest within 15 to 25 years. In Canada, we don't know exactly how many years yet because those are new here, but we'll find out. And so they're planting forests over a landscape. So Kingston in a forest. Think about the whole Kingston, like all these interconnected places. That's a city in a forest.
Hij is echt mooi.
Dus dat zit nu al in dit bosje, hè?
We zijn net ook al het kruispunt. Laten we maar even kijken.
And I won't leave that out, but like outdoor classrooms in the Netherlands, the Netherlands, where they planted, I think, over 100 of them now, most of them associated with schools, and they become outdoor classrooms. Boy, did we need those with COVID, didn't we? And we will need them going forward. So, and the ones that we planted, the Lakeside, Wolf Island, and Highway 15 Indigenous Food Sovereignty Project, all were planted with kids. About 80% of the planting was done by kids, which was absolutely phenomenal. There's one, this one's going in this fall, so if anybody wants to help plant, this is Addictions and Mental Health Services on Lion Street, so very, very central, which is fabulous and right next to KSS and Molly Brandt schools, and I think they'll both be helping with the planting. And there's hope of planting one in Champlain Park at Kingston Secondary School, still waiting on the city with that. But the landscape architect, he did he was inspired by Indigenous art. And this is one with, there's outdoor classrooms, but there's also sight lines for the teachers, so they don't have to worry. St. Lawrence students, we haven't heard yet if they're going to go forward with the Little Forest, but a student project put together a whole plan as part of a sustainability project challenge. And they initially looked at it meeting these 4 UN sustainability goals. I mentioned, well, biodiversity, our guts, we all know the importance of our own microbiomes. Now there's a hypothesis that the reason we have so many autoimmune disorders and the extreme anxiety and mental health, they are now linking that to the lack of biodiversity of our gut, which is linked to the lack of biodiversity in our cities. So the more we move wild and bring back these things in our cities, the healthier we ourselves will be. This goes towards all those relationships that I mentioned. So here's a bunch more of those UN sustainability goals that planting little forests would actually help us to meet. And this is just the whole process that we go through. It's like, but first this community, who's the community that's going to plant the forest? And then choosing the right species that go with it, amending the soil, sourcing seedlings, planting them, stewarding them for 2 to 3 years. It's not a long-term commitment, because then the forest is independent, just like kids grow up, the forest grows up. And Kingston Poet Laureate came out, he wrote a poem for planting last year, and he came and read it to a tree at Lakeside. He didn't tell us it was there, he just read Little Tree Day, which I thought was fabulous. And that's Laura Murray, she played the cello to the forest over at Highway 15. Robin Wallkemer again says, restoring land, but restoring relationship is an empty exercise. It is relationship that will endure and relationship that will sustain the restored land. So my challenge is, let's grow a city in a forest. Like, join us in growing a city in a forest. Let's become good ancestors. I think we all want that. We all want to be good ancestors, not just for other humans, not just for our grandchildren, but for all our relations. And these are some of the kids from Kingston Secondary School. Robert on the right there, he's actually running a GIS application for us this year. In his spare time, working as for the highway, he's in engineering at McGill now. But it gave them hope, these students. It gave them hope for the future. It helped them build a relationship with the Indigenous community here in Kingston. And some of them actually presented to City Council, which I thought was fabulous. Is that me? Sorry. So Forest Stewardship Network, this is the partnerships that we're building with Rotary. And I think there's a lot of hope with this network that we all become, it's not up to the city to care for our wild spaces, to plant our wild spaces, to care for our roads and our parks. How do we, in private and public land, become stewards of the land? So that's, look at that one. So finding land and senior center. Rotary has reached out to senior center, and that is a go. That's a project. The city is on board with that. So that's going to be fabulous. You can get involved if you'd like. Was that at Salvation Army Church, and that's also KCHC, the middle one. And we're not sure yet about KCHC, but the Salvation Army Church, they're like do whatever you'd like to the land. And they actually have a really cool vision of what if there was and they've talked to some of the other churches in the area, but what if there was like this labyrinth that led you to all of these green spaces, and what is at each one? And they actually made like signs in each of the spaces, and connecting not about, and so at Salvation Army Church, they don't care if you're religious or not. What they're trying to do is just support the community around them. And when I was visiting yesterday, they were just having this outdoor camp with the kids with soccer, baseball. I've never heard of that, but soccer, baseball, and water play and lunches. So here's the senior center one. This year we're planting Howe Island, Wolf Island, and addictions, mental health, caring for the little forest, and again, ongoing involvement of the kids, because the kids are our future. And that was, the kids were out there in spring removing the tree protection, but they were also setting up a mason bee house and releasing mason bees and planting pussy willows, because for pollinators early spring, pussy willows, we need our trees. Mapping neighborhoods with youth. So we experimented with this with KSS, and it's like, how do we understand the climate resilience of our neighborhood? And maybe schools were still trying to figure this one out. How do we map and plant? And this week we're actually knocking on Kingston doors, because the city is willing to offer trees to that neighborhood. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, how many can we find who actually want to plant a tree? And there's a lot of education, because most people can't tell the different trees apart. And if you've got a big tree already, some people might say, oh, we don't need a tree. But if it's not close enough to the street, it's not cooling this tree, or there's the opportunity for the different layers, so a lower level tree, or, you know, the trees at end of life. And just like humans, we need multi-generations at the same time, so that when that tree does die, we have more trees coming up. So it's kind of working with that. Conducting citizen science is something we're going to be looking at. So if you're into citizen science, probably a lot of kids will be. Starting micro nurseries. That one on the left is somebody in Toronto in a rental house that he got permission to start a nursery in his front yard, which is pretty cool. Influencing policy, so the official plan, and I mentioned that the analysis we were meeting last night. I think that this one is really, really, really important. So if you guys like policy, that's a great way to really help. And inspire with possibilities. We're going to look at pocket forest kits. So for homeowners, for front or backyards, just a mini kit. So you don't have to really know your trees. You don't have to know how they go together. We can just give you a kit and maybe even help plant if you need it and spacing for them.
We leave you with a look back at the highlights of a remarkable decade that has changed Australia forever.
The 2020s began in extraordinary fashion.
Work more regionally.
More work, more opportunity.
Solar and batteries would be ideal.
And build a sustainable society.
Today marked the first time that Australia has run on 90% renewable energy for an entire month.
That makes me feel really, really happy.
The government today announced it will follow the lead of other countries and live stream key policy discussions.
I think it's good. We need transparency.
Australians are now seeking out Australian made and owned products. The ripple effect is that we are now seeing healthy farmers.
There's nothing like endangered animals in a landscape that's coming back to life to give all Australians a real heartbeat.
We can deal better with the world when we're connected to nature.
It's been amazing to see the change that's happened from the closure of the power stations to the renewable energy zones. The young people are starting to stay and find work.
This family right now are earning cash because their electricity service provider are paying them to use the battery in this ute as storage for the grid.
So I just played that. That's Australia. They did a 4-month, for 4 months, they traveled around Australia and talked to people about Australia 2030, and they made a 20-minute film saying, here's what Australia could be. Here's what we would like to see Australia be. And now they have a Regen Australia movement where in each city they're doing these learning labs to try and bring that vision to life. And that was done as a, imagine it's New Year's Eve 2030, and this is the change. So it's a newscast from 2030. when they're like, this has happened. And I think that's pretty cool. So my question to you would be, imagine it's 2030. What brought you meaning, pleasure, and hope as forest stewards helping Kingston transition to a city to the forest with all that means?